Hello, this is James Hudnall and another episode of Creative Secrets. This one is part 2 of a series on the 3-act story structure. This is on Act 2, which is where most of the action takes place in a story, where the most important things will occur as the character continues to try to solve the problem that's been created in Act 1. And this is where we learn a lot about the character. This is where a lot of the character arc takes place. Understand that anything that happens in a story, the story structure and the character arc are interchangeable. They are part of the same thing, sort of like two sides of the same coin. And so what you do in this second act is not just action. It's about character development, in addition to all the things that happen, all the events which change the life of the character in some way. Now again, if you're doing serialized fiction, like a regular comic book about a character, that can be a little different, but it still maintains the same basic structure. So let's get into it. The thing you have to remember about the second act is there's a series of trials and tribulations that your character has to go through. They have to be searching for the object of desire, whatever that is, and there has to be complications. And each time they try something, they get defeated and they have to try something else. They also meet characters which will help or hinder them in the course of this section. And there are two main things that happen in a second act. In the very middle of the second act, things go right and they get what they're looking for. However, there's a twist, and during that twist, there is a second part of that, which happens towards the end, and that is where everything that they thought they had falls apart. Having something that they sought, they suddenly discover that it's more than they thought they knew they could deal with. There's a complication, so they lose it, in a sense. And that is where the second act pretty much has a big twist, which leads to the third act and the climax. We'll get into that next episode, but this part we're just going to cover it all in an overview. So here is the story circle again, so we can kind of go over it and you can see it in action. It's a great simplified version of a plot structure that has existed for thousands of years and has been boiled down and simplified. You'll notice that the lower half of the story circle is the second act. The second act is the largest part of any story. The other parts are the beginning and the end, which are about a third each. So 2/3 of it is the second act. The second act is the meat of your story, and this is where you introduce characters that are either help or hinder your character's journey. You will have the mentor or the guide of some character is going to serve that purpose. You might have a character that's the moral character that kind of questions the judgment of your hero and helps him see the light, possibly. And then you'll also have the villain or the antagonist, and the antagonist stands in opposition of what the hero wants. I'll be getting into villains and heroes in another episode, but understand that the second act is where the major work gets done as far as the character's development, and this is why you need to think about these themes and structures to help you guide you in a way that you can do it more masterfully. So the first act ends with the character's life being thrown into out of balance, and they have to go on a journey to solve the problem. And so the first act begins with go, which is also the end of the first act. And then search is the period where the character is searching for answers, whether to find the thing that they desire or to find out what they need to know. And then they find it, but in finding it, it answers things that they don't expect, things that might shock them or surprise them or have implications that they hadn't imagined, and that could be a life-changing thing. But then they lose it, it gets snatched out of their grasp, and then it comes to the do or die part of the story. This is where it's a life or death situation, either metaphorically or realistically. I mean, in a lot of stories, you don't have people about to die necessarily, but it's a situation where it can go totally against what they want. I also recommend that in the second act, you introduce a ticking clock type scenario. The ticking clock, as I explained in the time episode, is something to keep the energy going, so the momentum has to be moving for the hero and the villain. They need to both feel an urgency that leads towards the conclusion of the second act. That conclusion is sometimes called the dark night of the soul. It's where the hero is forced into a realization that they might lose, and they might lose everything. And they also question themselves and everything that's going on. It's where they enter a conflict within themselves as well as the external conflict. And this is where you decide how this is going to proceed and whether or not this question raised in your story is answered positively or negatively. Usually it's positive, but you can go negative. It should have a point either way. But now we're at the end of the second act, and this leads into the climax part of the story, the exciting part, and this we'll talk about in the next episode. So this is the second act, and I could have gone into a lot more detail, but I will later. I'm going to have to break it down into little sections to explain different methods and techniques, and it would take too long to do it all in this video. So that's it for now, and thanks a lot. I will talk to you next time, probably tomorrow, and I look forward to doing it again. Please check out the links below. Please subscribe, and see you later.